that constitute his main body of work extend Dutta's practice of looking at forms and spaces. His gaze often attempts to propel the everyday into the domain of higher disciplines like archaeology, architecture, drawing, and art history. Datta has been selectively writing on artistic practices from time to time. He has also conceptualized artistic presentations in the form of curated shows. He has been teaching for the last 2 decades now. He is a faculty member at the Department of Sculpture, Rabindra Bharati University, Kolkata. Sujaan Mukherjee is part of DAG's Museums Initiative, heading the research and development team. He has submitted his PhD thesis at the Department of English, Jadavpur University, on history and memory in public spaces in Kolkata. Sujaan writes for the books page of the Telegraph India and is a regular contributor at Scroll. He has been associated with different museums and archives in various capacities, including the Victoria Memorial Hall, the Save Guru Sadeh Museum campaign, the Jewish Calcutta Archive, and the Humphrey House Archive at the School of Cultural Texts and Records, Jadavpur University. His areas of interest include the physical cultures, urban histories, and modernism. Last but not the least, we have Shumona Chakravarty. Shumona is the founder of Hamdasti, a Kolkata-based arts platform for socially engaged art practices. Her work is participatory in nature, engaging diverse communities over a long period and collaboratively interventing in public spaces. She is a graduate of Shishti School of Art Design and Technology, Bangalore, with a master's degree from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. She has been a fellow in the Art Think South Asia program at Khoj, Delhi, and at the Global Cultural Leaders program hosted by European Union. She is currently working at DAG as the Vice President of the organization's museum program. Can we have a big round of applause for our delegates? I'll now be handing over proceedings to the speakers on stage. You can take it from here.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to our panelists, Tapati, Adip Dutta, andSujaan. Nice to meet you here in this wonderful venue on a lovely winter's day. So we're here today because over the past few years and months, all three of them have been working on highly anticipated volume on the artist Meera Mukherjee to celebrate her centenary year. And each of them have been associated with that project. It's a rather ambitious project in various different ways. Meera Mukherjee is an artist who maybe some of us are familiar with, some of us haven't heard of, but in a way occupies a very special and important position in the history of Indian modern art. And so I think we're here to pay tribute to her. We're here to talk about this book project and learn from Tapati, Adip Dutta, and andSujaan about what they have discovered about Meera Mukherjee as they've stayed with her through her writings and her works over the past few months and years. So Tapati, just starting off with you, if you could, that mic there. I mean, some of us have seen Meera Mukherjee's work when DAG opened that was my first encounter with Meera Mukherjee's work. When DAG had the exhibition at the Currency Building, and there was this, not one of her most monumental works, but a really significant and kind of sort of a work that left a deep impression on you in her work in bronze. So that's when I first came across her work. But Tapati, if you could please introduce Meera Mukherjee to the audience and tell us why you were drawn to this biographical project. In the past, you've told me that you often look at artist biographies as a part of a larger social and political context and don't often do single artist biographies. So what was special about this project and why did you take it up? What was special about Meera Mukherjee?
I should begin by thanking Malavika for hosting this session today, because much as we wanted to, our book is still not out. So nonetheless, as a kind of preview of a book that is now finally happening after several years. So I must thank Mala for giving us this opportunity to gather here today. It's a special day because it's the day Meera Mukherjee left this world 26 years ago. On the 27th of January, 1998, she died working till the very end on her last Buddha. Now, but before we come to her life and my interest and engagement in it, I should also thank Shupriya Banerjee of Gallery 88, who's not here with us today, but I'm missing her, because she is the one who entrusted me with this very challenging work. I'm not sure at all that I am the right person to have written this book, not least because, as Shumana said, my skills are not necessarily on writing on an individual great artist. There are many others who've done that work far better than me. More importantly, there are many others who've known Meera Mukherjee and known her work very closely, far, far more intimately than I can claim. So, but Shupriya Di had this faith in me to do the book. In a way, I procrastinated for several years. So I am the first guilty person here for not having this book ready. It should have been ready some years ago. And then there are many other more important guilty figures around too, but nonetheless, we can now say the book is almost done. I came into it as somebody who's interested in the time and the life she led, as much, of course, as the art she produced. And here I must say that the times were extraordinary, the ones she lived through, but so was the life she led. And so when we began to finally think about the book, I have written smaller artist monographs before. Is the screen, okay. Okay, so we are going to see a preview of the book cover, its first pages. It may change around a bit, but it is finally happening. So, as I said, what I really got drawn to her, I got to know her in the very last decades of her life. And I cannot in any way say I was close to her. I was in awe of her. I was in trepidation, because we know Meera Mukherjee could throw you out of the house very easily, and only in a few cases would she trust you enough to make you part of her cohort. So I went with all those trepidations. First in 1993, on the eve of a very large exhibition at Birla Academy that many of you, some of you here will certainly remember, where I saw her work, Akash, with which I began my essay. Before that, I had seen Meera Mukherjee's work through the 80s in different galleries, especially I remember the show at the Indian Museum in particular, where some of her finest pieces, including The Cosmic Dancer, which is now with Ruby Dee, who I'm delighted to have in the audience, is there. I'd seen her work. This is the first time I interviewed her. And then later, when Gayatri Sinha was editing a book on contemporary women artists in India, she asked me to write on her. Meera Mukherjee was not at all happy with the project. She did not want to be considered and framed as a women artist. She felt her struggles in many ways were specifically those of her gender. But I don't think she in any way wanted to be part of a coterie. So it took some convincing, and it was a difficult set of negotiations right till the end. But in the end, the book came out, she saw it, and then very soon after that, she passed away. I never had the opportunity to go to Elachi, but I knew the Padmapukur house. Now, for years before this book happened, we would meet at Gallery 88, Adip and me and Shupriya Di, with different research assistants. Sujaan came in only much later. And I would be regaled with stories about the person she was. So many anecdotes I absorbed. But I realized the more and more I heard her stories that I would need to distance myself to become a historian and write about her with some sense of detachment. And I think that came to me a bit more easily because I did not really know her so well. And so now Meera Mukherjee has become part of a myth, a legend, an inspiration through all the stories I've heard from her, some very personal, thanks to Adip. I know the wonderful parts of her life, but I also know the more bitter, the more difficult, the more contradictory, and the anxious parts of her personality. I saw that is how I wrote it. And I just, before I move on, and Shumon I'm sure has other questions, I just say, what is it about? My essay is called Meera Mukherjee, A Life Apart. Is this not moving? Okay. It was an extraordinary life that she chose to lead. And part of it was a life that was not of her own making. I was interested in the very diverse roots of her education, for instance, the cultural background she comes from, the fact that her training takes her from the Indian Society of Oriental Art, where she worked in Indian-style painting under Kalipada Ghoshal. This is from 1937 to 41. She was never formally educated, and she would love to say that she doesn't have the education, almost like Tagore never had the education. But of course, she knew an immense amount and read an immense amount. Then, in the course of her marriage, which was a very difficult period in her life, in those days, for a woman to walk out of a marriage took immense courage. But it gave her the opportunity to enroll in the Delhi Polytechnic. And again, I think about the capital in the first flush of independence, the heart of a modernist art movement, the beginning of IFACs, the beginning of the Delhi Shilpi Chakra, some of whom were her teachers at the Delhi Polytechnic. Her exposure there was a very important one, even though those years were some of the most difficult in her life. She emerged in a very different training. Then she returned to Calcutta, having walked out of the marriage. Among the many famous stories you hear are, she cut up her wedding sari into bits and left a hari of Rasgulla and left the house. I will never know the truth of these stories, but these were stories I heard. She came back to live with her brother. It was very hard to be a single woman without an income and without a home. She trained then very briefly with an Indonesian artist called Tapati Guha in Shantiniketan. But again, not at Kolabhavan. Afandi kept his distance from Kolabhavan. He said Nandalal Bose never liked him very much. And it was a personal mentorship, which I think was transformative to her, very, very important. Then, of course, came another big turning point in her life, her opportunity to go to Munich on an Indo-German fellowship to train at the academy there, initially in painting, printmaking, and then in sculpture under Tony Stadler and Kirchner, George Kirchner. Now, these were very important moves. There were other women of her generation who were all going on Indian government scholarships to Europe at that time. And I'd like to think of Amina Amit Kaur, her contemporary at the Delhi Polytechnic, but also Karuna Shah, Shanu Lahiri, who were all going to Europe, facing the same challenges, learning the language, and being asked to prove their Indianness at a time when they were out to break the shackles of Indian-style painting, even the Shantiniketan style, and become modernists and professionals on their own term. Meera Mukherjee was one of them, but her struggles were different. She learned the techniques of lost wax method of metal casting, which Adip will talk about more. She returned. She could have stayed on in Germany. She returned and then began a very different quest in her life. I will come back to that perhaps later, but my emphasis in my essay has been on this latter part of the artist as an anthropologist, searching out indigenous traditions of metal craftsmanship all over India, she became an anthropologist without ever having the training. And Nirmal Bose, the very well-known director of the ASI, Anthropological Survey, saw the potential in her of a working sculptor, taking to the job, learning material, methods, techniques, cast, all of that. She first went to Bastar to work, to learn about the Ghoruas on her own. And then she had a stipend with the Regional Design Center, institutions that very few people remember now, where she worked with Prabha Sen on metal casting. Then she actually got an ASI fellowship, and for 3 years, she toured the length and breadth of the country. Her focus was on the tribal belt, running from Bastar through Orissa, into Bengal, through Purulia, Chotanagpur, into the Santal Parganas. But she traveled to almost several parts of India and Nepal. She came back and then began, I would say, a different path where what Meera Mukherjee took from them was not just materials, methods, techniques. She embraced a worldview. And I think I look at the way the artist as anthropologist then fashions herself as artist, as artisan, as a worker. In that self-fashioning, there is no pretense. Meera Mukherjee embraced frugality, austerity, toil and labor as a way of life. She worked ceaselessly. And toil and labor of a kind that she could have simplified, but she embraced it. She worked without cease. She worked like an artisan. She worked all the time. And it is that cultivation of an artisanal mode of work and life and the building up of a community around her, which is not of artists at all, but of workers, both at Padmapukur and at Elachi, where Nirmal Sengupta, her lifelong partner, ran a village school, set up a house, and she set up a casting foundry. So that is the second part of my essay, the artist as anthropologist, and the artist as a self-styled artisan who embraced a mode of living and working, even though she had all the contradictions and tensions, the hierarchies, but also an intellectual and cultural life that she led in parallel. That, of course, her artisans and her workers were not capable of. But I think I've said enough, far too much. Maybe on to the next piece.
Thank you, Tapati, for that introduction to the artist's life. We'll go into more details later, but also your sort of engagement with the book. Adip Dutta, over to you. You, of course, met the artist at a very young age in your childhood, and then your relationship with her evolved. Could you speak a little bit about this relationship, your impression of the artist, how you understood her practice, and how it shaped you as an artist and a sculptor as well? At Chakravarty, you had spoken very beautifully about how, you know, Meera Mukherjee's sculpture is often special and why she stands out in the canons of modern Indian art as a sculptor, because her sculptures bear the marks of this labor, of this ceaseless kind of labor that she put into it. And that sort of also showed us your very personal relationship with the artist. So if you could speak a little bit more about that association.
Thank you, Shumana. I also take this opportunity to thank Kolkata Literary Meet. I thank Mrs. Shupriya Banerjee because we've been working for a very long time. My apologies, I had to be pushed because I sat on it, and the delay is partly because of me. So that is that.
How long I delayed?
No, but
in the beginning. So that's not the point. Come on.
So I met her, at an artisan's workshop. I had worked with clay image makers, and so when I first saw her, I also thought her to be, another image maker. The whole idea of an artist, an intellectual, didn't come to my mind at that point. So that she had an aura, that she was someone very special. I've never thought at that point. I was taken to her house. I saw the sculptures, but more than the sculptures, frankly, I was more drawn to those beautiful books on art history, beautiful reproductions, and those, and of course the person. So true that I thought her to be, another artisan, but with a different texture, and gradually I learned that that she was, yes, she operated like an artisan, but she was also something more than an artisan. As a young learner, I've always aspired for the skills of making. That was very important to me at that point of time. But only it was through her that I came to realize that that the design is actually an outcome of an artist's inquiry, and that field of inquiry is more important than the mere execution of it. So, however simple it may appear now, but at that point of time, it was quite a revelation. And even today, when I teach at the institution, this is what we as teachers try to convey to our students, and because that is the key to the visual that you are finally producing. I learned that because since I worked with a traditional image makeup, clay was very fundamental to me. I knew it definitely, but the clay as a very diverse material never appeared to me the way when I saw it is being used at her studio. It was part of the creative process. It was part of the molds that she would make, because earlier, I was acquainted with the European Sireperdu process of making molds, which is basically plaster and brick dust. But here it was clay. So clay was the most important material all through, and she would also from time to time she would say that without the material, an artistic practice is nothing. There isn't anything. So she's talking of the content on the one hand, and then moving on to the material, which is more tangible. Those the way she would explain in those relationships was an experience too. And the other thing, she was, she would make drawings, and drawing was never a practice sort of to make the sculptures. It was an autonomous, if I say so, it was an autonomous practice. It was another practice that would lead her to the sculptures, but she wouldn't go looking for a subject to make, and it came organically. It was always a moment. I remember that when she thought of considering, but of course, space was very important to her. She would move to these spaces, and would start interacting with these spaces, people around. So from and gradually would the sculptures start percolating, and it was a slow process. But once it sort of started, it was very fast, and she would make the sculptures at a go, like, 3 to 4, and she was very fast. I had seen her work in the 90s, so that was, the final decade where she was producing those numerous works. But I believe when I look back and I see the works, the 70s is where she was exploring the material. Because that is where you get to see a sort of singular figure, and then finally she's moving on to the collective and then the space later, because showing space in sculpture is very unusual. At that point of time it was definitely. So to bring in space as a motive was quite a challenge. And she could do it because she had already gained that confidence, and the technique has evolved. I remember this is a story that Barin Shah was a very close friend, and Barin Shah was a filmmaker who had, for many reasons, who had stopped making films. So after one of her exhibitions, she had asked Barin Shah to reflect on the works and the show. Barin Shah thought that the works were repetitive. But she would say that, Barin Shah failed to look at the technical aspect of the works, which contributed to, the style and the language, not the style, but the language, because Barin Shah had stopped to make films. And Barin Shah was, I won't say thrown out of the house, but Barin Shah never came back. It was such an unpleasant, so at that point I thought that she was not being able to take criticism, but now I realize that what made her upset, and she was very protective as far as, the works that she was doing, very protective, and also, the seriousness was such that even if you come up with a criticism, it has to be explained to you as to why you say that. So nothing was just like that. Nothing was just like that, even if you give her some time and you don't turn up, you've had it. So I've learned a lot of things, but of course, sorry to say, not that disciplined.
Just one thing I wanted to add, because Adip's essay is in some ways a very critical one in the book, because he is, so the depth with which he's made us non-practitioners understand the huge complexity of a method. The work could be small, or the work could be in 26 to 30 parts like Haroshok, but the complexity, the different kinds of clay that she would bring in, the wax detailing, the outer casing, the making of the muchi, there were terms. So I think with Adip's essay, and I don't think anybody else has written on the understanding her work from within, from the beginning process to the end. And I therefore have to say, and the way in which she would continuously improvise, which is why she did not want ever to have a set drawing. Even as she made, every work was a challenge and an experiment, which is why the huge anxiety and tension. This was a life lived on the edge, the anxiousness, both the passion of the work, but the anxiousness of every night of casting for even such a seasoned worker. And for every large piece, there would be several small pieces that would sustain her. I just thought I would add that too, because that's a very crucial part of the essay, to understand how she was continuously innovating, improvising. If there was a flaw, she would work around it. So, and therefore, despite the large team of workers, she was the master artist here. Without her involvement at every stage, it would not happen. And I'll come to again the last Buddha, which finally had to happen, the final it without her. But I thought I would add
yes,
that.
No, absolutely, because I'll also start. You see, I've always thought that why does she take part in the casting? It was much later that I realized that it's actually she's made a reverse journey. She knew the European Cire Perdu, the lost wax process of casting very well. I've also thought that she responded to those tribal motifs, those archaic figures. She could have easily made those figures and cast them in the European Cire Perdu. It would have been easier for her. It would have been, it would have been much easier. But she never did that, because that would have been, a synthetic way of doing it. So she took a reverse journey in learning the process of the indigenous metal casting. Now, you see, the Dalit politics at that point of time never acquired the kind of dimension it had acquired now. And it was immediately after independence, so people were trying to define, the nation state in a different way. Now with these indigenous curators, historians, there could be kind of a criticism, but I try to look at it as, someone who's responding to the vitality of the tribal format, and then aspiring to learn the process in a very simple way as that. It was never sort of to take away from the indigenous mode of production, but and as Tapati said, that she turned into an anthropologist because from an artist, I believe she always graduated to an art practitioner, because she looked for the Vishwakarma, and especially when it comes to in search of Vishwakarma Shandhane, she's just not looking at the motive separately.
Just to interrupt, this is a final work, a book that she writes.
Yes.
If you could just talk about it.
But she's she was involved in it since the 70s. Yes. So it was to look for the Vishwakarma, to look for the space where the Vishwakarma is located, the cultural milieu of the Vishwakarma, and then the mode of production. So that comes last. So if you read Vishwakarma Shandhane, you'll know what she was actually looking at.
Absolutely. So just to caveat that one of her final writings is Vishwakarma Shandhane, where she's looking at the god of makers, craftsmen, laborers, and talking about the larger philosophy, and trying to, as you all write in the book, draw a kind of lineage from this mythology to a modern sculptor and their practice in some ways. Sujaan, you worked a lot in translating her text. So what did you learn about the artist from that process? Tapati and Adip have already sort of told us about her practice a little bit hinted at this journey into Bastar, but also this frenetic life she had between a house in Padmapukur and the Elachi Gram, where she made her molds and then went into this very dramatic final casting process. But the diary entries sort of help us read in between these major incidents and milestones in her life, or major moments. So what did you learn about her from working with these texts?
Yeah, thank you, Sumona. And I mean, to begin with, I felt very much like an interloper in this project, because I don't come from any sort of formal training in art history or arts practice. And so over the last several months, I think it has more than anything been a process of learning not just new facts about an artist, but also different approaches to understanding an artist. And I mean, going through her diaries, her other writings has been a kind of a revelation for me, because of course, as you said, the diaries do help us kind of read between the lines, but you also get the sense that they could easily be considered as a literary, output in their own right. I mean, and she's not just writing the diaries because, let's say, when she visits Bastar in the 1960s, later she would write the Bastare Dinlipi, which was her journals of Bastar. Then after that, she would also, as Adip Dutta said, write Bishwakarma Shandhane, which was not really a kind of, and this is the funny part. I mean, she goes out with this kind with the funding from the anthropological survey, right? And she produces a tome of a report based on her researches across various communities of metal craftsmen. The beautiful thing about that is that she refuses to use photography as a method of documenting these craftsmen. What she does is she sits there and she sketches every single technique, every single tool, every position in which the craftsman works with their tools and produces something. And this is something that that was not really appreciated when she came back to do her presentations at the Indian Museum, because if you're an anthropologist, where is your objective proof that you've been here? Where is the objective proof that you're representing the correct thing about these craftsmen? But that was really not her point. And so on the one hand, she's producing a documentation like that. On the other hand, the similar experiences and her own philosophy get translated into something like Bishwakarma Shandhane, which is kind of a mythography of this group of artisans who all trace back their lineage, claim a lineage back to Bishwakarma across castes, communities, religions, and so on. Her diaries, again, like I said, I mean, they can very well be read in their own right, much as you would, the diaries of someone like, say, Virginia Woolf, because they're absolutely, I mean, beautiful is a slightly vague word, but I would say because they're so absurdly honest, in the sense that they contain the vulnerabilities, they contain when she's anxious, they contain moments of, of celebrating the kind of ecstasy that she feels around her work. And I just like to read one entry, which is from the 14th of January, 1970. So, which also gives you a glimpse into how she works time into these writings, in a sense of how much she manages to capture in very simple details. So she says, visited Didi in the morning. Shilu, Shibu, Didi, Rotna and I, we all went to Bowbazar. We have all called, yes, that's the ancestral home. We have all called 202 Bowbazar Street home at some point in our lives. Today is Shankranti. Choto Khurima has added a new idol to her altar and decorated it with a lot of love and care. She took me to see it. It reminded me of Ma's Alpona, of how I'd skip across the red-floored courtyard to go upstairs, of the floral motifs that were Ma Lokhi's footprints. When Ma was in charge of the pujo arrangements, Lokhi's throne used to shine so brilliantly, like silver. The heap of paddy would overflow, and with great care, she would place at its peak the silver kunke and a small bottle of vermilion. Then she would decorate the floor around the throne with alpona, birds, peacocks, flowers, every manner of motif that you can imagine. The throne looked lackluster today. Everything inside the house had changed almost unrecognizably. I went up to the roof on the eastern side where I had spent many a morning watching the sunrise. In that little clearing over there, the workers, probably Nepali or Bihari, would light a fire to keep themselves warm on winter mornings. And in the afternoons, they'd sit under the almond tree and roll their bidis. They're all gone now, disappeared without so much as a trace. Their spot now occupied by a carpenter's shop. So this is one of those passages where she's, recounting an experience, but then that leads her to trace memories from her childhood as well. And what's really remarkable is that, even in the diaries, she's constantly reading, she's practicing, she's training as a vocalist. So, and she's very sincere with that too. I don't think she really understood being insincere about anything. I mean, quite an intense person that way. So she's training with her guru. She's constantly reading. She's translating from German, from Rilke, and even from the French. So she's reading Camus quite a bit. You get where that existential angst would also come from. So and she's constantly she's practicing words, she's practicing music, she's practicing sculpting, drawing, as Adip Dutta said. So it's really something that gives you the sense of someone who's almost helplessly exploring expression, across various media, across various forms and genres as well. So it's really been somewhat overwhelming, but I also think it builds a kind of intimacy with the artist which is difficult to find, without factoring in all of these aspects of her practice and life.
One of the things I found also so fascinating is that there's series of names. This is a diary. I mean, there were several pages, obviously, of a diary. It is by accident that only some were taken away by an artist come publisher and published first in Bangla, and we've done the English translation. But the chances are in the 70s, she's possibly writing every year. But what's interesting is, to me, two things. The large numbers of working people who she refers to, side by side with intellectuals like Loknath Chatterjee, Stella Cramrish, David Mukherjee. They're also part of her circle. She visits Pradosh Dasgupta. She visits Ramkinkar Bej in hospital when she's dying. So she's between many worlds. She has tensions with some of her workers who she feels is letting her down. When she makes her Ashok, she feels finally Motor is beginning to understand and admire me. She's also deeply concerned that he may lose his job at the Regional Design Center. She's reading in French and German. She's also working till literally frenetically, till she's absolutely exhausted. She's going to see films and theater. It's Calcutta of the 70s, which Sujaan was not born then, but we've lived through. The Calcutta of the Nakshal violence, the Calcutta of Satyajit Ray's Pratidwandi, Mrinal Sen's interview, she's responding to all of it. So I do feel as a historian, it's an amazing testimony, not just to her own intimate life. She's crying over the fact that she has to pay 50 rupees extra to a welder and doesn't have the money. And to think then of, she was always struggling for money. So it's all these worlds that collide in just 2 years of the diaries, which to me was absolutely fascinating. And Sujaan has done a brilliant work of translation.
Thank you, Tapati. Sorry, Shuvana, just one point that I wanted to mention, because Tapati, thank you for mentioning the fact that that they were brought out by this. So now this publishing house has gone through many iterations, as Bangla publishing houses often tend to do. And the one person who's responsible for kind of rescuing these diaries, as it were, because the rest are lost, and publishing them, as well as Vishwakarma Shandhane, doing some of the editorial work, is a gentleman called Sandipon Bhattacharya, who's, if you go to the book fair, you'll find him at the Mon Fakira stall. So they bring out a very large number of art books. So he believes in bringing out primary resources of artists in Bangla. So just a major thank you to Sandipon Babu as well, because without him, none of this would have actually existed in all probabilities.
And we are carrying a long interview with Sandipon Babu in the book also. So in a way, I mean, he's both an artist, a young artist, absolutely in awe with her, but also later becomes her primary publisher in her own lifetime, and then also later, he's the person. And these are the first English translations. I should also mention here that Gallery Rasa, Rakesh Sani, has been an immensely useful resource. We've even found some typed but unpublished memoirs of her time in Japan, and just called Casting Season, which we are very privileged to carry in the volume. So I think that archival resource that Rakesh Sani produced has been important. And I should also say Arun Ganguly has been the main photographic chronicler of her work from 1978 with a break in between and then the 90s. So without this very rich photographic archive and documentary archive, I don't think our book would have gone in the direction it is. So just mentioning that.
I just thought, this is in regard to the diaries. The 70s and the 80s have been, brought up in the diaries because late 80s she started to focus on in search of Vishwakarma. And volumes of diaries, as Sujaan said, that she was very frank and in sort of registering each and everything that is happening. So a large part of the diaries were destroyed by the family after her demise. So that is where we don't have, a major portion of the diaries. 70s is very important because that is when she does, the colossal figure of the Ashoka, and I remember seeing a letter by Stella Crumrish written in the 1960s where she's asking her to think of the possibilities of making a larger piece in this technique, and that is where it all started from.
And the Ashokas at the ITC Moria in Delhi.
Yes.
And then the final work with the larger work than the Ashoka is the Buddha. Maybe you can just end by speaking about that, but also there are 3 of 2 bowls which are there right across in Nandon. 3 bowls which are right across in Nandon. 2
left.
Yeah.
Originally there were 3, 1 stolen.
Okay. So we can end with the Buddha and then hand over for some questions to the audience.
It's this, there was something almost mysterious and I would say transcendental about the way she worked and died. Her last Buddha began as a commissioned work, but then exceeded everything in scale, in amount of material, in amount of money, resource. In 97, she did not...
Behind us. So it was just behind us.
Yeah, in 97, the last year of her life, it would turn out to be, she almost stayed stuck at Elachi. She never came back to Padmapukur, maybe only briefly. She mobilized a larger team. Ashoka had been made in 26 parts. Buddha, if I'm right, in over 60 parts. She was working frenetically. Her technique had matured to a point that while Ashoka had taken 4 years to make, she did it in 1 year. She had cast even, apart from finishing all the molds, she had even cast a few of it, some hands, some limbs, and finally the head of the Buddha. And by that time, her belief in the myth of Vishwakarma and in the larger philosophy of Buddhism was very intense. She had a way of connecting Vishwakarma with the larger lineage of Buddhism. She was not a practicing Buddhist in the way in which we even understand now, but she was deeply inspired and she was working on the Buddha almost as a form of self-sacrifice. She talked about the monks in Tabo, in the Western Himalayas, who would work as an act of self-surrender and then detach themselves from the work itself. It seems Meera Mukherjee's was the final act of self-surrender. At least that's the way I look at it. She saw the head of the Buddha. There must have been immense relief. And within days of that, she suffered a massive heart attack, died in Elachi without Nirbal Babu next to her, her life partner, surrounded by her sculptures and the community of workers who she had made her family. They were her family. The photographs of Arun Ganguly show community eating, working. They were her family. She left. There was something very dramatic. And the fact that the Buddha came together, she died thinking it may not ever come together. that was another story of how people came together. Adip's father played a very powerful, important role. She had wanted the work to be welded in Bhavanipur in an open plot opposite their home. There are letters she had written to his father, Mr. Ashim Dutta. And finally it all happened, but it happened without her. She died on 27 January. Sometime in March, there were funds that were gathered by friends, admirers. The remaining bits were put together by her workers with some of the young artists also who worked. Then they all came, and we have photographic documentation of it by Arun Ganguly. They arrived at Udepara and Bhavanipur, where the welders put it together. And for some time, it stood again like her Ashoka with no certainty of a buyer in Udepara, Bhavanipur. Then the Goodrick Tea Group acquired it. The Buddha traveled again, this time to the hills. It stands in the tea estate at Badamtam, very far away from the art community. It exists there as a sacred icon, and I don't know that she would have been unhappy with this. I think a masterpiece of modern Indian sculpture today is also a sacred icon among the tea planters, the tea plantation workers. And I feel this is a community art ultimately, because it was completed without her. But it was her will and desire that drove it. And today Buddha sits on top of a hill, looking over the Rangit Valley. Very few of the art community really sees her there, unless you make a special trip. And I would recommend it to each and every one of you. If you're in Darjeeling, go to Badamtam Tea Estate and see her Buddha there.
Just one thing, Meera Masi was a practicing Buddhist, I would say. But if...
She also worshipped Kali. She also was deeply into Durga.
Absolutely. But would always say, Buddhang Sharanang Gacchami, yes, yes, yes. Dhammang Sharanang Gacchami, never, never, never. And her life partner was a staunch communist. So Barin Shah, the friend would come and would ask, Miradi, aaj apni ki communist na Buddhist? And so that, she would. So yes, of course, the Buddha was the last work, and it just took 1 year, and she'd completed 66 pieces. Only she'd made the creative work, the molds were ready, only 2 were left to be cast. And almost the entire body was welded except for one of the arms, which was done after she has passed away. So, and yes, of course, the Buddha moving to the hills is also, it's so dramatic, and it all just happened.
Thank you so much for those wonderful anecdotes. Over to any of you for final questions. We'll be taking 2 questions.
Yeah, this is Abhishek Roy. Very enlightening discussion. I have a very small question to Tapati. Is that Meera Mukherjee led a very wishful life, completely a life on her own terms. But as you say that she didn't want to identify herself as a woman artist, and why was that? Because that was also that she, because there was probably a very anti-establishment part in her, and she didn't want to even get into another establishment. Was it that? So if you can just say a few words.
Should we collect the questions?
Yeah, let's collect some questions. We can answer them.
I think that will be easier for us.
Those of us who were fortunate to see the exhibition at Gallery 88 last year agree that Arun Ganguly was the boss with the camera. 3 pointers which must be mentioned in order to complete the tribute to her. As children, our first exposure to Meera Mukherjee was through these wonderful books from Seagull, Carlo and the Coel, Catching the Fish, and other stories. I wonder if you've also covered that in your discussion, and if a parallel could be drawn between what she did for the Indonesian artist Effandi during her brief period at Bishwabharati, and the role Tony Stadell played in her choice of her vocation back in Munich, paralleling that with the role she played in molding Nimai Bhaskar at Elachi, the Guru Shishyo tradition between these two. That's it. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. Over
I'll
to you.
let Adip answer the second one, and let me just directly respond. You know, her struggles as a single woman in an unconventional social relationship with Nirmal Sengupta. There was nothing surreptitious or secret. Nirmal Sengupta had his own home in Mahanirban Road. She had hers in Podapukur, in Elachi. But he was the emotional and intellectual anchor of her life. And I think she, in every sense of the term, became his partner. Now, all of these are highly gendered struggles. I think you're absolutely right that there was a women's group that was formed, and she left very quickly, not because she had anything against them. She felt that their real struggle was against Shongshar. Children, Shongshar, and trying to work through it all. And it was true that they were mothers, they were housewives, and they were also struggling to be professional artists, and they needed a forum for exhibiting. Meera Mukherjee already had that forum. She had her own Shongshar with her own community. So I don't think she identified with their problems, and she didn't want to be in a coterie. But I would say in her work, the woman worker, but also the woman as mother, the woman as carer, the woman as working, the intricacy of woman's work. And then there's the Katha project, of course, where she brings the women to work with children's drawings, and her own illustrations for children's stories and the Katha pictures speak to each other. So I would say Meera Mukherjee was neither fully an artisan, neither fully an anthropologist, and neither just a woman artist either. She was all of that. Her struggles were deeply intellectual, creative, and personal. And I faced that unease that she should feature in a book on contemporary women artists. Who knows? You know, it's a different era now. She was a feminist without ever overtly being one. I'll let Adip answer the other question about the stories and all of that.
Yeah. If I've understood the question, you see, you've talked about Nimai Bhaskar. Nimaida was a carpenter, and he was picked up from the design center in the 70s. And she taught Nimai, the entire process of casting, true. But Nimai never worked on his own, nor did he function as a technician. So Nimai was carrying her instructions mainly. True, but he also became a virtuoso, and as far as casting was concerned. But Nimai never took any decision. Either he never wanted to, and Meera Mukherjee was with all the parts of the casting. That is because because she's not taken up a method of casting that is predictable. She was also improvising because she introduced dewaxing. Dewaxing is not is not practiced by these traditional artisans, but dewaxing has come from European Sirepedu. So she was reconciling the two methods, and in that, only it was in her mind. So it was difficult for anyone else to come and be a part of that. And what was the other? The children's story, yes. As Sujaan said, that she would extensively write on all sorts of things, and be it the diaries or small notes of something that she's seen, and some of the writings are like Ekti Prajapati Atmahotya, the suicide of a butterfly, is a wonderful piece, and she was very good with languages. So it was only that one of her friends, Ranjit Babu, who was the then director of the Anthropological Survey of India, and she just wanted to write some stories and books for Ranjit Babu's son. So it was never thought of. She never thought of publishing it, but there were beautiful drawings, and eventually they got. But it started with Ranjit Babu's son. I still remember. Forgetting the name, but it all started like that. So. Mishkin, yes, but it never came up as a planned proposition.
But also Seagull was very important at that stage, and we should mention that they organized the first of the Katha. She called it An Artist Born in a Village, the Stitch Painters of Dhankhed Vidyalaya. They organized the first exhibition, and they are the first to publish her children's books in Bangla and then through translation. So in the 80s, Seagull is playing a very important role in bringing this part of the work into the public.
I think
but they were also very nicely translated by Anjum Katyal.
Absolutely. Many people to sort of take into credit, and lots more to explore in the book. I mean, we didn't even have time to go into the Bastar journey and the return, or this wonderful life, or details of this wonderful life that she set up at Elachigram and the kind of community art practice. But all the more reason to look forward to, reading the book and going through it once it is published. Thank you so much, Adip Dutta. Thank you, Tapati. Thank you, Sujaan, for this illuminating session.
Thank you, Sumona, for taking us through this conversation.